The crimson sun of October 23, 1944, cast ominous shadows across the Philippine waters as Admiral Soamu Toyota stood on the bridge of his flagship, contemplating what would become the most desperate gamble in naval history. The Japanese combined fleet, once the terror of the Pacific, now faced its final hour, with fuel reserves dwindling and American forces poised to sever Japan's lifeline to Southeast Asia. Toyota knew that failure meant the certain doom of the Empire of the Rising Sun. General Douglas MacArthur's promised return to the Philippines had begun 3 days earlier, when American forces stormed the beaches of Leyte. The sight of those familiar landing craft and the thunder of naval bombardment sent shockwaves through Imperial Japanese Navy headquarters in Tokyo. For Admiral Toyota, this was the moment he had been preparing for since assuming command of the combined fleet. The Shogo operation, Japan's last coordinated naval offensive, would either crush the American invasion or die trying. According to Naval History and Heritage Command archives, the Japanese plan involved a complex three-pronged attack designed to catch the Americans off guard. The strategy was audacious in its complexity and desperate in its execution. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa would lead the Northern Force, a sacrificial decoy fleet built around the remaining aircraft carriers Zuikaku, Zuiho, Chitos, and Chiyoda. These once mighty vessels now carried fewer than 100 aircraft between them, their experienced pilots long since fallen in battles across the Pacific. Ozawa's mission was brutally simple: draw Admiral William Bull House's powerful Third Fleet away from Leyte Gulf, leaving the landing forces vulnerable to annihilation. Meanwhile, the center force under Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita would execute the killing blow. His formidable fleet included the massive battleships Yamato and Musashi, the largest warships ever built, along with the battleship Nagato, heavy cruisers Otago, Maya, Chikai, and a screen of destroyers. This floating fortress would punch through the San Bernardino Strait under cover of darkness and fall upon the defenseless American transports and escort carriers like wolves among sheep. The Southern Force, split between Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura and Rear Admiral Kiyohide Shima, would simultaneously surge through Surigao Strait with battleships Fuso and Yamashiro, supported by heavy cruiser Mogami and destroyers. The plan required precise timing, unwavering courage, and more than a little divine intervention from the gods their ancestors worshipped. As Admiral Kurita's center force steamed through the Palawan Passage, the massive guns of Yamato gleamed in the tropical sunlight. Each of the super battleship's main battery shells weighed as much as a small automobile, and her armor could theoretically withstand any weapon in the American arsenal. Yet Kurita harbored deep reservations about the mission. The Imperial Navy had suffered catastrophic losses at Midway, the Philippine Sea, and countless other engagements. Many of his finest officers and sailors rested on the ocean floor, and those who remained fought with the desperate fury of men who knew they were witnessing their Navy's final chapter. The American forces commanded by Admiral Thomas Kincaid's 7th Fleet and Admiral House's 3rd Fleet represented the pinnacle of naval power. Fast carriers, modern battleships, heavy and light cruisers, and destroyers formed an armada that dwarfed anything the world had ever seen. Yet even these veteran commanders could not have imagined that they were about to participate in a naval battle involving nearly 300 warships across an area larger than the entire state of Texas. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not only the fate of the Philippines, but the ultimate outcome of the Pacific War itself. The pre-dawn darkness of October 23, 1944, shattered with the terrifying shriek of torpedo wakes cutting through black water. Lieutenant Commander David McClintock, commanding the submarine USS Darter, had been tracking the massive Japanese center force since the previous evening. Through his periscope, the silhouettes of enemy warships stretched across the horizon like a steel city. Moving through the night, at precisely 6:32 in the morning, McClintock gave the order that would draw first blood in history's greatest naval battle. 6 Mark 14 torpedoes erupted from Darter's tubes, their wakeless trails racing toward the heavy cruiser Otago, flagship of Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita. The explosions that followed sent towering columns of water and flame skyward, visible for miles across the calm seas. Admiral Kurita, thrown from his feet by the devastating impacts, watched in horror as his flagship listed heavily to port, her compartments flooding rapidly through massive tears in her hull. Nearby, Lieutenant Commander Bladen Claggett in USS Dace had also achieved a perfect firing position. His torpedoes slammed into the heavy cruiser Maya with such violence that the warship's magazines detonated in a fireball that lit the dawn sky. Maya disappeared beneath the waves in less than 4 minutes. taking over 1,000 sailors with her. The heavy cruiser Takao, also struck by Darter's remaining torpedoes, limped away trailing oil and listing dangerously. Her fighting days forever ended. Admiral Kurita, rescued from the waters by a destroyer, transferred his flag to the super battleship Yamato and grimly assessed his losses. In less than 20 minutes, his force had been reduced by 3 heavy cruisers, and the Americans now knew exactly where he was heading. The element of surprise, so crucial to the Shogo plan's success, had been lost in the depths of the Palawan Passage. The submarine attack sent shockwaves through both fleets. Admiral Halsey, commanding the 3rd Fleet from his flagship USS New Jersey, received the contact reports with predatory satisfaction. His fast carrier task forces, built around the fleet carriers Essex, Lexington, Franklin, and Enterprise, immediately altered course to intercept the Japanese center force. The hunters had become the hunted, and Halsey intended to finish what the submarines had started. Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher, the brilliant tactical commander of Task Force 38, launched massive airstrikes from his carriers as soon as the Japanese fleet came within range. Wave after wave of Hellcat fighters, Helldiver dive bombers, and Avenger torpedo planes darkened the skies over the Sibian Sea. The Japanese force, lacking adequate air cover, could only endure the aerial onslaught with their anti-aircraft guns blazing defiance. At their tormentors, the super battleship Musashi, sister ship to Yamato and pride of the Imperial Navy, became the primary target of American fury. Her massive 18-inch guns, capable of hurling shells over 20 miles, were useless against the swarming aircraft that attacked from every angle. The first torpedo struck her starboard side at 10:15 in the morning, followed by direct hits from 1,000-pound armor-piercing bombs that penetrated even her massive deck armor. Throughout the day, Musashi absorbed punishment that would have sunk any other warship afloat. 19 torpedoes and 17 bomb hits gradually overwhelmed her compartmentalization and damaged control systems. Her crew, displaying the stoic courage that characterized Japanese naval service, fought fires, plugged holes, and maintained her guns until the very end. As evening approached and the great ship's list became unrecoverable, Captain Toshihira Inoguchi ordered his surviving crew to abandon ship. At 7:35 that evening, Musashi rolled over and sank beneath the waves, taking over half her crew of 2,400 men with her. The largest battleship ever sunk by air attack had become a victim of American carrier aviation, demonstrating once again that the age of the big gun had passed to the age of naval aviation. Admiral Kurita, witnessing the destruction of his magnificent fleet, momentarily wavered in his resolve and ordered a temporary withdrawal westward, away from the relentless air attacks. As darkness fell over Surigao Strait on October 24, 1944, Rear Admiral Jesse Oldendorf prepared to execute the most perfectly planned naval ambush in history. His battle line of 6 battleships stretched across the narrow waters like a steel wall of death, their massive guns trained southward toward the approaching Japanese southern force. Among these veterans of Pearl Harbor were the resurrected battleships West Virginia, Maryland, Tennessee, California, and Pennsylvania, their crews burning with 2 years of accumulated vengeance. Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura's southern force approached through the confined waters, with the fatalistic determination of samurai entering their final battle. His flagship, the battleship Yamashiro, led the column, followed by battleship Fuso, heavy cruiser Mogami, and 4 destroyers. These ships represented some of the Imperial Navy's oldest and most honored vessels, but they were steaming into a carefully prepared killing ground from which few would emerge. The first phase of Oldendorf's trap began with a series of devastating torpedo attacks by American destroyers racing through the darkness at flank speed. Captain Jesse Coward's destroyer squadron, Winterfore, struck first, their destroyers launching spreads of deadly Mark 15 torpedoes before vanishing into the night like maritime ghosts. The explosions that followed illuminated the strait with hellish fire as Japanese warships staggered under multiple impacts. Battleship Fuso, struck by several torpedoes, broke in half with a thunderous roar that echoed across the water for miles. Her forward section continued steaming northward for several minutes before capsizing, while her stern section drifted burning until dawn. Destroyers Michishio, Asagumo, and Yamagumo suffered similar fates, their hulls shattered by the powerful American torpedoes that had been perfected through hard-won experience in earlier battles. Historical records from the Naval War College indicate that this engagement represented the last time battleships would fight battleships in naval history. Admiral Nishimura, his force decimated but his resolve unshaken, continued northward in his battered flagship Yamashiro, accompanied only by the damaged heavy cruiser Mogami and destroyer Shiger. These three survivors faced the concentrated firepower of the entire American battle line, their guns ranging from 14-inch to 16-inch caliber. At 3:51 in the morning of October 25th, Admiral Oldendorf gave the order his crews had been waiting 3 years to hear: commence firing. The darkness exploded into daylight as dozens of heavy guns opened fire simultaneously. Yamashiro, caught in a crossfire from which there was no escape, absorbed hit after hit from armor-piercing shells that tore through her superstructure and penetrated her vital spaces. The battleship's return fire, though accurate and determined, could not overcome the overwhelming odds. Her forward turrets fell silent one by one as direct hits destroyed their machinery and crews. Fires raged throughout her length, and her list increased steadily as flooding overwhelmed her damage control efforts. After 19 in the morning, Yamashiro capsized and sank, taking Admiral Nishimura and most of her crew to their deaths in the depths of Surigao Strait. Heavy cruiser Mogami, her superstructure a twisted wreck and her speed reduced to bare steerage away, attempted to escape southward but was intercepted by American cruisers and destroyers. The final survivor, destroyer Shiger, somehow managed to evade destruction and limped away to carry news of the disaster back to Japan. Rear Admiral Kiyohashima's second striking force, arriving several hours behind Nishimura, encountered the burning wreckage of the first attack and wisely withdrew rather than add his ships to the carnage. The southern force had been annihilated with minimal American casualties, proving that superior tactics and preparation could overcome even the most determined enemy assault. The Battle of Surigao Strait marked the end of an era in naval warfare. The last time battleships would engage battleships in mortal combat, Admiral William Frederick Bull Halsey stood on the bridge of his flagship USS New Jersey as the morning of October 25, 1944, dawned with deceptive calm over the Philippine Sea. The aggressive commander of the Third Fleet had built his reputation on bold offensive action, and the intelligence reports flooding his communications center presented him with what appeared to be the opportunity of a lifetime. Vice Admiral Gisaburo Ozawa's northern force, built around for aircraft carriers, was steaming south from Japan in what seemed to be a desperate attempt to attack the American invasion fleet. The Japanese carriers Zuikaku, Zuiho, Chitos, and Chiyoda represented the last remnants of the once mighty carrier force that had struck Pearl Harbor 3 years earlier. To Halsey, these ships were the ultimate prize, the final chapter in his personal war against Japanese naval aviation. What he did not realize was that he was walking directly into the most elaborate trap in naval history, exactly as Admiral Toyota had planned from the beginning. Ozawa's mission was one of sacrifice from the outset. His carriers possessed fewer than 100 aircraft between them, barely enough to mount a single significant strike. His pilots were inexperienced boys who had received minimal training due to fuel shortages and the loss of veteran instructors in previous battles. The Northern Force existed for one purpose only: to draw Halsey's powerful fleet away from Leyte Gulf and give Admiral Kurita's center force a clear path to the American landing beaches. According to the classified communications intercepts analyzed by the National Security Agency, Ozawa's radio transmissions were deliberately designed to attract American attention. The Japanese admiral broadcast in codes he knew the Americans had broken, ensuring that his position and intentions would be quickly discovered. He launched his pathetic airstrikes against Halsey's task forces not to inflict damage, but to convince the American commander that he was facing a serious threat that required the full attention of the Third Fleet. The deception worked perfectly. Halsey, consumed by the vision of destroying the last Japanese carriers, ordered his entire fleet northward in pursuit. Task Force 38, with its fast carriers and supporting battleships, raced away from Leyte Gulf at maximum speed, leaving only Admiral Thomas Kinkaid's escort carriers and destroyers to guard the landing beaches. The most powerful naval force ever assembled was chasing shadows, while the real threat approached from the west. Admiral Kurita, his center force battered but still dangerous, had recovered from his temporary withdrawal and was now approaching San Bernardino Strait. Under cover of darkness, his super battleship Yamato led the formation, her massive 18-inch guns loaded and ready for the surface action that had been denied to Japanese battleships throughout most of the war. Heavy cruisers Nagato, Haruna, and Kongo followed in her wake, their crews prepared for what they knew would be their final battle. The American escort carriers of Admiral Clifton Sprague's task unit, 7-7 Point for Point 3, known by the call sign Taffy 3, were conducting routine combat air patrol operations when lookouts spotted the unmistakable pagoda-style masts of Japanese battleships emerging from the morning mist. The 6 escort carriers Fanshawe Bay, St. Lo, White Plains, Cullinan Bay, Kitkin Bay, and Gambier Bay had been designed to support amphibious operations, not fight surface engagements against the most powerful warships afloat. Admiral Sprague, realizing that his small force was all that stood between Kurita's battleships and the helpless transports in Leyte Gulf, made the desperate decision to stand and fight. His destroyers USS Hull, USS Heermann, USS Johnston, and destroyer escort USS Samuel B. Roberts turned toward the Japanese battle line in attacks that defied every principle of naval tactics. These small ships, their 5-inch guns no match for the enemy's massive armament, charged directly at the super battleship Yamato in one of the most gallant actions in naval history. The stage was set for a David and Goliath confrontation that would determine whether MacArthur's invasion of the Philippines would succeed or end in catastrophic failure. Halsey's fleet was 200 miles away, chasing decoy carriers, while the fate of the Pacific War hung in the balance off Samar Island. The morning mist off Samar Island parted like a curtain of death as Admiral Takeo Kurita's center force emerged from San Bernardino Strait. At 6:45 on October 25, 1944, the super battleship Yamato, her massive 18-inch guns trained on the horizon, led a formation that represented the concentrated fury of a dying empire. Behind her steamed heavy cruisers Nagato, Haruna, Congo, and Tone, their crews finally given the surface action they had trained for throughout the war. Admiral Clifton Ziggy Sprague, commanding the escort carriers of Taffy 3 from his flagship USS Fanshawe Bay, felt his blood freeze as the distinctive pagoda masts of Japanese battleships materialized through the haze. His 6 escort carriers and 7 screening vessels faced odds that would have made ancient Spartan warriors proud. The mathematics of the engagement were brutally simple. Kurita's 23 warships displaced over 300,000 tons and mounted guns up to 18 inches in diameter, while Sprague's entire force displaced less than 100,000 tons with no gun larger than 5 inches. The battle off Samar began with Yamato's first salvo at 6:58 in the morning, her massive shells creating towering waterspouts that drenched the American carriers with spray. The distinctive dive markers used by different Japanese ships soon turned the sea into a rainbow of death as red, green, yellow, and purple columns erupted around the frantically maneuvering escort carriers. Admiral Sprague ordered his ships to make smoke and run for their lives, while launching every available aircraft in a desperate attempt to slow the Japanese pursuit. Commander Ernest Evans, captain of the destroyer USS Johnston, made a decision that epitomized the fighting spirit of the United States Navy. Without waiting for orders, he turned his ship directly toward the massive Japanese battle line and attacked at flank speed, his 5-inch guns blazing defiance at targets 10 times his size. Johnston's first target was the heavy cruiser Kumano, and Evans' gunners scored multiple hits on the cruiser's superstructure before launching a spread of torpedoes that forced the Japanese ship to turn away to avoid destruction. Naval historians from the U.S. Naval Institute have documented that Johnston's solitary charge inspired the other screening vessels to follow her example. Destroyer USS Hull, under Commander Leon Robert, and destroyer escort USS Samuel B. Roberts, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Robert Copeland, joined Johnston in attacks that naval historians would later describe as the most gallant in American naval history. These small ships, their crews knowing they were sacrificing themselves for the greater good, pressed their attacks to point-blank range against overwhelming opposition. USS Samuel B. Roberts, nicknamed the destroyer escort that fought like a battleship, engaged the heavy cruiser Chikai in a gun duel that would have been comical if it had not been so deadly serious. The destroyer escort's single 5-inch gun fired over 600 rounds in 35 minutes, scoring multiple hits on the much larger Japanese vessel. When Roberts' ammunition ran low, her crew resorted to loading star shells and even anti-aircraft projectiles in their desperate attempt to keep fighting. The escort carriers, meanwhile, fought back with whatever weapons they possessed. Their aircraft, designed for ground support and submarine patrol, attacked the Japanese ships with depth charges, rockets, and even empty drop tanks when ammunition ran out. Pilots made dry runs over enemy ships when they had no weapons left, hoping to distract the gunners and throw off their aim. The air group from USS Gambier Bay scored multiple hits on cruiser Chikuma, eventually forcing the damaged ship to withdraw from the battle. Heavy cruiser Chikai, set ablaze by repeated hits from American aircraft and the determined gunfire of Samuel B. Roberts, fell out of formation and later sank from her wounds. Cruiser Chikuma, her speed reduced and her superstructure wrecked, also withdrew from the engagement. The coordinated attacks by Sprague's aircraft and screening vessels had thrown Kurita's formation into confusion and significantly reduced his effective firepower. But the odds were simply too great to overcome. USS Gambier Bay, hammered by multiple Japanese cruisers, became the first American aircraft carrier sunk by surface gunfire during World War II. USS Hull disappeared beneath the waves after absorbing dozens of hits from enemy battleships and cruisers. Johnston, her hull shattered and her crew decimated, finally succumbed to the overwhelming firepower arrayed against her. Yet even as his ships died around him, Admiral Sprague's desperate defense was achieving its ultimate objective, buying precious time for reinforcements to arrive. At the moment when defeat seemed inevitable, Admiral Takeo Kurita made the decision that would puzzle naval historians for decades to come. Standing on the bridge of the super battleship Yamato, as his guns pounded the remaining American escort carriers, the Japanese commander suddenly ordered his entire force to break off the attack and withdraw northward. The transports and landing craft of Leyte Gulf, helpless and within easy reach of his massive guns, would live to see another day. Kurita's reasoning reflected the fog of war that had descended over the largest naval battle in history. His communications with other Japanese forces had been severed, leaving him unaware that the southern force had been annihilated in Surigao Strait, and that Admiral Ozawa's northern force was successfully drawing Admiral Halsey away from the battle area. The fierce resistance of Admiral Sprague's Taffy III had convinced him that he was facing a much larger American force than actually existed. The Japanese admiral's scouts reported additional American task forces approaching from the south, though these were actually Admiral Felix Stump's Taffy to escort carriers rushing to Sprague's assistance. Kurita, his fuel running low and his formation scattered by the desperate American attacks, concluded that he had lost the element of surprise, and that continuing the attack would only result in the destruction of his remaining ships without achieving the mission's objectives. Post-war interviews conducted by the Strategic Bombing Survey revealed that Kurita believed he was facing Admiral Halsey's fast carriers rather than escort carriers. The smoke screens laid by the American destroyers had obscured the true nature of their opponents, while the ferocious resistance encountered suggested a much more powerful force than 6 escort carriers and 7 screening vessels. The psychological impact of losing 3 heavy cruisers to what appeared to be inferior opposition had shaken the confidence of the Japanese commander and his staff. As Kurita's force withdrew through San Bernardino Strait, Admiral Sprague's surviving ships counted their incredible good fortune. The escort carrier USS St. Lo, damaged but still operational, was recovering her aircraft when a lone Japanese bomber appeared overhead. At 10:51 in the morning, the plane, piloted by Lieutenant Yukio Seki of the Shikishima Special Attack Unit, dove directly into the carrier's flight deck in history's first organized kamikaze attack against American naval forces. The explosion that followed St. Lo's destruction marked the beginning of a new and terrible phase in the Pacific War, as Japan turned to suicide tactics in her desperate attempt to inflict unacceptable casualties on the advancing Americans. The kamikaze, or divine wind, would claim many more ships and lives before the war's end, representing the fanatical determination of an empire that refused to acknowledge defeat. Meanwhile, Admiral Halsey's Third Fleet had finally caught Admiral Ozawa's decoy force for 100 miles north of Leyte Gulf. The battle that followed was a one-sided massacre that eliminated the last remnants of Japanese carrier aviation. Aircraft from Task Force 38 sank all for enemy carriers, including the veteran Zuikaku, last survivor of the Pearl Harbor attack force. Light cruiser Tama and several destroyers also fell victim to American bombs and torpedoes. But Halsey's victory was overshadowed by the realization that he had been outmaneuvered by his Japanese opponents. The Great Deception had worked exactly as planned, drawing the most powerful American fleet away from the main target. While Kurita's force came within minutes of achieving a stunning victory, only the incredible heroism of Taffy III and Kurita's last-minute decision to withdraw had prevented a disaster that could have prolonged the Pacific War by months or even years. As the sun set on October 25th, 1944, the Battle of Leyte Gulf was finally coming to an end. The largest naval engagement in history had involved nearly 300 warships and over 100,000 sailors, airmen, and Marines from both sides. The Crimson Dawn of October 26, 1944, illuminated waters stained with oil and littered with the debris of the greatest naval battle ever fought across an area of ocean larger than the state of Texas. The remnants of once mighty fleets struggled homeward, their hulls scarred by battle and their crews exhausted by 3 days of continuous combat. The Battle of Leyte Gulf had reached its conclusion, but the price of victory would echo through history for generations to come. Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, received the final battle reports in his Pearl Harbor headquarters with mixed emotions. The strategic victory was complete. Japan's combined fleet had been shattered beyond repair, losing for aircraft carriers 3 battleships, 10 cruisers, and 11 destroyers in the massive engagement. The Imperial Navy, which had once terrorized the Pacific from Alaska to Australia, would never again pose a serious threat to Allied operations. The path to Japan's home islands now lay open to American invasion forces, yet the cost of victory weighed heavily on American commanders and their crews. The escort carrier USS Gambier Bay and destroyer USS Johnston rested on the ocean floor alongside their Japanese opponents, their crews having paid the ultimate price for freedom. The destroyer USS Hull and destroyer escort USS Samuel B. Roberts had joined them in their watery graves, their heroic sacrifice ensuring that General MacArthur's invasion of the Philippines could continue. Nearly 3,000 American sailors and airmen had died in the 4 separate engagements that comprised the battle, each life a reminder that victory in war always comes at a terrible cost. According to official Navy Department casualty reports compiled in 1945, Japanese losses exceeded 10,000 killed and wounded, representing some of their most experienced naval personnel. Admiral Takeo Kurita's center force limped back to Japan with barely half its original strength, while Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa's northern force had been completely annihilated. In its sacrificial mission, the cream of the Imperial Navy's officer corps, trained in the great naval academies of Iwo Jima and seasoned by years of combat, now lay beneath the waves of Leyte Gulf and the Philippine Sea. The strategic implications of the battle extended far beyond the immediate tactical results. Japan's merchant marine, already decimated by American submarine warfare, lost its primary naval protection as the surviving warships were forced to remain in port. Due to fuel shortages, the oil reserves of Southeast Asia, so crucial to Japan's war effort, were now permanently severed from the home islands. The economic strangulation that would ultimately force Japan's surrender had begun in earnest. General Douglas MacArthur, watching from his headquarters ship as the last Japanese forces withdrew from Philippine waters, knew that his promise to return had been fulfilled through the sacrifice of thousands of American servicemen. The liberation of the Philippines could now proceed without interference from major Japanese naval forces, though the fighting on land would continue for many more bloody months. Admiral William Bull Halsey faced intense criticism for his decision to pursue Ozawa's decoy force, leaving Leyte Gulf unprotected. The controversy would follow him for the rest of his career, though many historians would later argue that his aggressive action eliminated the last Japanese carrier threat and shortened the war. The debate over Halsey's actions during the Battle of Leyte Gulf continues among naval historians to this day, reflecting the complexity of command decisions made under the pressure of combat. The technological lessons learned during the battle would influence naval warfare for decades to come. The dominance of carrier aviation over surface ships was conclusively demonstrated, while the heroic actions of destroyers and destroyer escorts against superior forces showed that courage and determination could still influence the outcome of modern battles. The introduction of kamikaze tactics marked a dark new chapter in warfare that would culminate in the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. As the survivors of both fleets returned to their home ports, they carried with them the knowledge that they had participated in history's greatest naval battle. The young sailors who had fought off Samar and in Surigao Strait would grow old telling their grandchildren about the day when freedom's fate hung in the balance over the waters of Leyte Gulf, and how their courage and sacrifice had helped secure victory in mankind's greatest war.